Welcome, Tactical Lich here, and we have more Khorne practice games, this time played between me as Khorne versus Stead as Vampire Coast. For the army builds here, I'm going for a super wide Khorne infantry rush with a bunch of marauders and one of them dual weapon variant, plus bloodletters and Forsaken as the front line. Forsaken having relatively good speed and very good offensive stats. They can punch through the Vampire Coast chaff easily. In this guy, some Chaos Furies to silent enemy missiles, and of course a couple Chaos Warhounds on the far corners of the battlefield, ready to pounce on enemy backline as well. A few units of throwing axes, horsemen for the AP fire to deal with in case any crabs on the Vampire Coast side. Valkyr the Bloody with only Demon Shield for invulnerability and no Spear of Sleipnir against the Vampire Chaff. For the Vampire Coast army, a very classic box here, a bunch of deckhand mobs, some of them with polearms, some of them the regular ones, surrounding a missile core, a bunch of hand cannons with their very solid damage output at the cost of range, and pretty bad firing arc, but overall, if they can get a shot onto enemy units, they will absolutely shred them to pieces with their insane missile AP fire. Shade Wraith Gunners for the discourage effect, very nice against marauders or demonic units, forcing them into early routes or early demonic instability, eliminating those units early, and then a few more units of rotting Prometheans for that monstrous presence and mass to pin down enemy monsters. A couple units of Khorne to deal with in case any Minotaurs and large single entity monsters, and for the leadership, Vampire Fleet Captain of Lore of Deep with Fog of the Damned to reduce enemy leadership and melee attack, stopping that Khorne melee rush, and Tidecore for AoE damage. We have Aranessa Salt Spite for the Lord Choice, Spearfisher's Net for the, well, of course, net effect to pin down enemy moving units, and All Hands Ahoy for extra damage and leadership. That's it for the army builds, and now let's get the battle started. My win condition for this battle is basically to eliminate all these Vampire Coast missiles, the hand cannons, Shade Wraith Gunners, and the Khornes, so that my skirmishing cavalry can then kite away at the rotting Prometheans with their superior speed and AP missiles cutting through that thick shell of these Vampire Coast crabs. And after that, the zombie chaff should be able to get cleaned up by the Marauders of Khorne, and I should be able to win the game. But of course, my opponent isn't just gonna let me do everything for free. As you can see here, the Shade Wraith Gunners are already firing at the Marauder front line. They're doing some noticeable damage with that penetrating explosive shots. Khorne's not having a lot of good targets to aim at. They decided to shoot at the Furies instead, though unfortunately, they don't really have the easiest time hitting these Khorne flyers. So unfortunately, not a lot of damage from afar, though the Shade Wraith Gunner is definitely a very good unit to kill off the Chaos Furies, so I'll have to pull back these Furies before they get forced into early demonic instability. So yeah, some pretty good damage against my infantry and flyers, but because of all these missiles having their attention occupied by the Furies, the Chaos Warhounds are able to slip past the defenses of the rotting Prometheans, jumping onto the Khorne crews. One of them is already on the verge of crumbling, the other also half dead, but with the rotting Prometheans and halberds moving in, the Warhounds were forced to pull back, and before enemy formed their defenses, jump back right in and really trying to work down those Khorne crew. The other Khorne has been eliminated. The Warhounds try to jump on top of these hand cannons, but unfortunately being routed by the nearby rotting Prometheans. The crabs are definitely not letting the hounds get away scot-free. Furies at the same time diving into the backline. Some of them took a ton of damage from the hand cannons close range fire, so one of them is already fading back into the warp. The other also down to half health, rotting Prometheans flooding in to help these Shade Wraith Gunners, while more Furies are trying to pile onto the Shade Wraith Gunners. The infantry are engaging, Marauders duking it out against the zombie deckhand mobs. However, the Furies are in a bit of a trouble as the hand cannons are able to fire point blank into my mobility, doing some substantial damage. You can see that these hand cannons are pretty much very devastating slug shotguns. Just firing a few seconds into the Furies are enough to force some of them into demonic instability crumble, forcing them back into the warp, though with their attention captured by the flyers, some of my infantry are safe from being shot at. and quickly clear out the obstacles of this Vampire Coast box. The Bloodletters, unfortunately being shot by the hand cannons, wasn't able to do much before they will start fading away as well. However, these Bloodletters are in a much better position now, jumping onto the surviving Carronade, cutting off the last bit of long-range firepower of the Vampire Coast. Rotting Prometheans piling onto my offensive infantry here, trying to stop the tide of Khorne infantry rush. However, that means some of these hand cannons at the backline are exposed to a charge from the Chaos Warhounds. Things are getting quite desperate for the Vampire Coast, dropping in a taunt from the Vampire Fleet Captain, trying to slow them down and reduce their melee defense, and on top of that, the Rotting Prometheans are coming in to screen the Hounds away from the missiles. However, with the Carronades gone, throwing axes are able to get close to the Rotting Prometheans and now start throwing in those AP missiles onto the Vampire Coast monsters. A tight call, chipping away the health of some of my infantry, but they do have that spell resistance, keeping them alive in the middle of these AoE magic damage. The Marauder at front line are pretty much victorious against the zombie melee chaff. Some of these hand cannons got a little bit out of position, trying to move up and shoot at my mobility and the infantry, but unfortunately they're now being dragged into melee by Marauders and Valkyria herself. More Marauders are coming in, now trying to go after the surviving hand cannon crew. I think there's only, one unit of hand cannon left now that the other one has crumbled to dust. So as soon as I can finish off these hand cannons, there is nothing to stop my throwing axes anymore, as they are now just sitting back, slowly chipping away the health of these Rotting Prometheans. Bloodletters are moving in to fight as well, just tying down these crabs, allowing the throwing axes to output damage from a safe distance. Valkyria and Aranessa are both in this blob fight here, not fighting each other but against each other's chaff. Valkyria cutting through the last bit of these hand cannons, while Aranessa just too busy fighting through a bunch of Marauders of Khorne. Marauder horsemen are moving in. Now these ones are kind of stuck on the melee deckhand mobs. They need to pull back before they start taking damage, though the other horseman is willingly charging into the crumbling hand cannons, delivering a rear charge and forcing it into crumble, eliminating the final missile piece from the Vampire Coast. But that means they're close enough to Aranessa, who is stuck in a blob fight and get hit by a Spearfisher's net. So now they're stuck in this spot here, unable to pull away from the pursuing crabs and the nearby halberds, taking more and more damage, and they might actually be routed by the Vampire Coast unit. Thankfully for me, I still have 2 more units in the vicinity, just doing some really steady DPS, slowly but surely working down those Rotting Prometheans. Marauders, Forsaken, and Bloodletters will be acting as the anchor here, just tying down these enemy monsters in this blob fight, while Valkyria duke it out with Aranessa's Salt Spite. With the nearby zombie pirate deckhand mobs providing some infantry support, maybe Aranessa's Salt Spite will have a bit of a better time than Valkyria, but it seems like Aranessa's Salt Spite is taking more and more damage in this fight here, especially when Valkyria having that frenzy effect, providing some very solid melee attack buffs, allowing her to penetrate the defenses of Aranessa's Salt Spite. Don't forget, Valkyria has magic attacks that can bypass the physical resistance on Aranessa. On top of that, the Fog of the Damned and Horn of Khorne was deployed at the same time, so the melee attack debuff is cancelled out. Valkyria might be a bit more fragile from the taunt ability, but she still has the same damage output. Rotting Prometheans now piling onto the frontline Marauders here, but that's not gonna stop them from getting shot by the throwing axes. Valkyria continues to pursue Aranessa, while Aranessa trying to seek safety among the support of her Rotting Prometheans. Now finally, both of the buffs and debuff spells have worn out. Back to the generic stats between the two characters, and Valkyria is definitely having the upper hand here, having way more HP left. There's also a bunch of out-of-ammo Marauder horsemen acting as her meat shield, blocking hits for her. A little bit of tight call, chipping away the remaining health of the Marauder horsemen of Khorne, though unfortunately that's not going to do much here, as Aranessa's Salt Spite stuck in the middle of a ton of Marauder horses. Now Valkyria will be finishing her off, settling this duel between the two Spirit Ladies once and for all. The death of Aranessa is going to be a big hit to the leadership of these undead, though they're still being sustained by the Vampire Fleet Captain, on the balance of power, so they're not crumbling away just yet from army losses. But as you can see, Valkia is just easily handing it to the Vampire Fleet Captain, bringing victory to the Blood God. GG to my opponent instead, and now let's have a look at the army performances, where the Marauders did pretty okay there, beating back all the zombie chaff. Bloodletters, one of them got annihilated by the hand cannons, the other also got bullied by a bunch of rotting Prometheans. They can probably kill one of them, but when 3 of them are piling on top of one Bloodletter, yeah, that's just a bit too much for these demonic infantry. The Forsaken cleared out a ton of zombie chaff, so that was pretty nice, and the mobility did okay in shutting down the Vampire Coast back line. Throwing axes, of course, carried against the rotting Prometheans, doing some very solid anti-armor damage, and Valkia the Bloody basically dueled both of the Vampire Coast characters. And because the Coast army here doesn't have any healing, I had a much easier time bringing down on the Vampire Coast defenses. I was definitely a bit lucky here, as my opponent picked Aranessa instead of Count Noctilus, so there was no healing available, no zombie summon, and there's only some lore of the deep debuffs and AoE damage. And also Aranessa Salt Spy isn't exactly the best lord in the Vampire Coast roster, so wasn't actually doing much in the entire fight, being countered by, well, pretty much anything on my Khorne roster. The lore of the Deepcaster didn't do too much as well, dropping in some tide calls here and there for the magic damage, while the infantry of course didn't do much as they were soundly beaten by my Marauder infantry. Hand cannons got shut down, same goes for the rest of the long range missiles. Very unfortunate there. The rotting Prometheans did slightly better, but still not having a good trade when they're getting shot by a ton of AP throwing axes. And that's it for today's battle. I hope you all enjoyed this multiplayer action. If you want to see more Total War Warhammer multiplayer battles, be sure to subscribe to my channel. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Tactical Lich, signing out.